Hey everybody, I'm Eddie Starr, and this is the College of Rock and Roll Knowledge. Class is now in session. This is where the music and culture that shaped a generation live on, and my own path through the world of rock and roll. One evening in the 1960s, so the story goes, my mom was watching TV, an interview with Diana Ross, and she heard her mention producer and musician Arthur Wright. Moving forward to the spring of 1986 in Southern California, where I was about to graduate high school. And I already knew what I wanted to do. I was not going to go to school, even though all my friends mostly were. When people asked me what school I was going to, I told them I was going to the College of Rock and Roll Knowledge. Little trivia for you there. That's where I got the title for this podcast. In fact, most people signed my yearbook by saying, "Good luck to you at the College of Rock and Roll Knowledge." At that time in the mid-1980s, there were not a lot of musicians around, or at least I couldn't find anybody that resonated with the style of music I wanted to play and my vision. So I thought, well, maybe if I find a producer who's willing to work with me and I can make a record and then form a band around that and start playing, that's my ticket, because I don't think sitting around and running ads is going to bring me anybody except an Yngwie wannabe. So I graduated and basically spent the summer hanging out. And in September, my mom had said to me, her and my dad had met Arthur Wright. And so she said, "Why don't you give Arthur Wright a call?" And so I did. And I spoke to him for a few minutes on the phone. And he asked me to come up and meet with him at his office. And I did. And of course, I just basically laid out what I wanted to do, what my ideas were. He asked if I had a demo or any songs, and I really didn't know a whole lot about demos or really even writing songs. So I just told him, I didn't bring it with me. I just thought this would just be an introduction or whatever. So he said, "Okay, well, why don't you come back in 2 weeks and we'll talk again." And, I guess he must have saw something in me to invite me back after, being unprepared, or maybe he saw that I was, naive. But I went home and I had to figure out what I was going to do. So I put together, you could say, 4 ideas on a cassette. Me playing my guitar and singing. And about 2.5 weeks later, I brought the tape to him. And so he decided he wanted to work with me. And so January of 1987, we were in the studio, Quadtech Studios in Los Angeles, and began recording. And basically, there were about 4 songs I was writing and doing other stuff. Also, he had brought some songs that he wanted me to do. For instance, he wanted me to do, completely remake this version of the Mamas and Papas Monday, Monday, which I was really not into at all. But he thought, we could make it what you do with a cover song, make it you. And so anyway, that didn't fly. And so after numerous starts and stops recording, it just sort of went away. And I moved on to other things. And I tried acting for a while. And then about 1995, I was living in the Hollywood Hills, and it was one of those moments where everything, the stars are aligned right, and everything comes together. And I moved into this really cool building. Well, the building was cool, that's true, but it was really the people who lived there that made it really cool. A lot of artists and writers and, TV people and stuff like that. And it was small. And it was a small group. It wasn't a large apartment complex or anything like that. And so I met a lot of people, and I started writing songs, and, I found a lot of people who sort of shared the style of music that I really enjoyed, which was the punk rock from the mid 70s, the English, Sex Pistols, Penetration, Susie and the Banshees, and, a lot of the early British glitter music as well. Of course, I did like some of the stuff that had come out of Los Angeles in the mid 70s, but by the time I really started coming of age and really getting into music, most of that music had all gone away, and it was all new wave and metal. And I mean, there was a lot of cool bands that, came out, but there wasn't anything that was that sort of straight ahead rock and roll, except, of course, sort of Joan Jett had come out with her early work, and Billy Idol as well. So there were survivors from that whole scene from the 70s that had come forward and brought that style of music forward. So it was through them that I found, other records, and sort of that's where sort of my whole mix of music that I champion, came together. And anyway, I was introduced to this guy named Calvin Popejoy by this guy named Jeff, whose last name escapes me at this moment. But he introduced me to Calvin, and he was a lead guitar player. And so we started writing some songs together. And so I had about 4 or 5 songs, and we made a demo. And so I was still in touch with Arthur Wright, and so I called him up, and he listened to it, and he said, "Oh, well, can you improve upon this?" And he had some criticisms and stuff. And so basically, Calvin, turns out he had some connections of his own, and he knew this guy. He introduced me to Fred Schroeders, who is best known for his work with Hiroshima. He's a great session musician and producer, and he produced 4 songs. So the song Numb, Bleed, and there were a couple other songs, which I won't mention, that did not make the final cut of the Generation Zero album. That you'll have to hear at some other time. But anyway, we did 4 songs, and Fred was great. We did everything, everything was done sort of like that layering process of the drums and then the guitars and the bass. And I played rhythm guitar, and Calvin played his lead guitar. And Calvin was really an amazing lead guitar player, and he was playing around and, with a bunch of promising LA bands at that time. And so we did those 4 songs, and they came out great. And so I went back to Arthur Wright, and I played those songs, and, we sent them out to some labels and stuff. And, basically I was told, keep writing. So I started writing some other songs, and I don't remember who or what, because it's a long time ago, but I got sent over to the San Fernando Valley, and I met this guy named Rick James. And not Rick James of Super Freak, but just Ricky James, studio owner / engineer. And so I had like 3 songs. One was a holdover from my days, the early days, working with Arthur Wright. And then there was a couple other new songs I had written. And so we played him. He also played drums. So I think it was me and him playing. And of course, I didn't have a bass player or anything like that. So he found a bass player. And then he said, "Oh, I know this guy who you will probably really click with. And his name is Kelly. And he's really into like, the Sex Pistols, but he loves AC/DC. And his guitar playing is really like the Sex Pistols meets AC/DC." So I said, cool. So I met Kelly. He came down. He played the lead guitar tracks on these demos, and it came out really great. And we really hit it off because he really understood where I was coming from. And of course, you have to put this in the context of this is pre-internet. So a lot of times, mentioning like, oh, the Stooges, or mentioning Iggy Pop, Lust for Life, or The Idiot, or talking about the Runaways or Generation X or any of those bands. Not many people knew who they were, because you have to remember that, yeah, Billy Idol had, 1983, he had become a big star, but a lot of people in America really weren't as familiar with that Generation X. In fact, it was my friend Dave, who you probably remember, who came on here, who does Press Play with Dave and Charles. He came on, and well, he was my best friend in high school, and he's the one who turned me on to like Generation X and just countless bands. And so nobody really knew that, but he did know that. Kelly did know that. And, he was like, well, let's form a band. And he was able to bring in Don McCurdy. It was just a monster drummer, really great. And then we found this guy, Matt, to play bass. And we did go through a fair share of bass players. And anyway, so we went around and we played some shows. Me and Kelly wrote some songs together, and we were able to really work out the songs live, which was really cool. And we were really a very tight and great sounding band. Always were. Well rehearsed. We rehearsed at Fortress Studios in Hollywood. Michael Rummins, who of course was, I think, in the Hollywood All-Stars, Kim Fowley's band. Some more trivia. And so we were ready. When we went in the studio, and we did like about 8 songs. I think it was 8 songs, because I already had the other tracks that I'd done with Fred Schroeder's. And Matt left the band. He had some type of emergency anyway, but he had to leave California. So we were without a bass player. Kelly Charles switched to bass. Don McCurdy on drums, and I was playing rhythm guitar. And so we went in the studio with Arthur Wright, and engineered by Charles Givens. And we were like a locomotion, like a freight train coming at you, because we just did take after take. Most of those songs were done in one take. And I think Rejected we did twice, because the first take, the feeling wasn't right. We didn't, we wanted to try another take. But I mean, I remember engineer Charles Givens coming out and just saying, my God, he said, I have never seen a band, that just bam, bam, nail it, time after time. And so that album was done in like one afternoon. And then Kelly had to come back and, overdub his solos. And I, did the vocals and stuff like that. And, unfortunately at the time, because we didn't have the correct business people around us, that album didn't go anywhere. And consequently, the band didn't either. We played the album was completed in 1997. And we played throughout 1998 until March of 1999. And it was March 1999 when that was the last show that we played at the Whiskey. And those tracks wouldn't see the light of day until 2013, October 8th, 2013, when they came out. And so, it was a great band. It was a great experience making that record. It really did take a long time. There were numerous starts and stops, but it was fun. And I had a lot of great people working with me, and I'm so blessed to have had that experience. And that band, I mean, I always judge things by, when I'm playing or I'm playing a song, I'm such a fan myself that I always think, well, what do I want to hear? What would I want to hear if I, from a favorite artist, or, how would I want that band to sound like? I never would want to be, a disappointment. And so that's one thing I can always say is that, Eddie Starr and the Zero Effect, we kicked ass. And if you want to hear the band live, you can, there's the EP Live from Hollywood, which also came out on October 8th, 2013 with the Generation Zero album, because those recordings, hadn't really ever been heard, along with the band. So that was recorded live at the Blue Saloon in North Hollywood, California on October 31st, 1998. And I'll give you a little story, a little backstory about that night, because I'll never forget it, because I had to pick up a couple of the guys and we were going to go to like some diner or something and sit and chat before we had to, our equipment had already been taken over to the Blue Saloon. So it was already set up and ready to go for sound check. So I just had my guitar and some other, clothes, I think, to change, stage clothes to change into. And we were driving. I picked up the guys. I think our bass player Vince lived in like Lakewood or Long Beach. And then there was Kelly, who lived in the Valley. So I think Vince met at my apartment, and then we drove over the hill, and we're on Lankershim Boulevard. And at the time, that's when they were putting in the subway and all that stuff. And, they had this big sign on Lankershim Boulevard, "Your tax dollars at work," when the street had been like torn up for, I don't know, probably 10 years. And anyway, hit a bump. And I didn't think anything about it because it wasn't anything big. It was just the road was bumpy, right? So we meet at this diner, and we're sitting around chatting, and stuff like that. And the restaurant, not the waitress, but the manager of the restaurant came up and said, "Hey, man, is that your car out there?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Man, there is oil all over my parking lot." So it turns out that the bump I had hit had busted a hole in my oil pan, and all the oil was just all over their parking lot. So, of course, it was like, "Oh my God, we've got to, get over to the club," and all this other stuff. So I had to call a cab, and, it's not like New York getting a cab. So had to get a cab. I think Don had driven and met us, and so he took Kelly over to the club, and I think it was me and Vince and some of our equipment that we had to get in the cab, and I had to also arrange for my car to be towed and all that stuff. But it was a great show, and I got a tape of that show somehow. I forget who gave it to me, but anyway, so we're going to take those tracks, and we put out a few tracks from that show. So anyway, you should check it out, because it is a great document of a band with a lot of potential. And I still believe in that band, and I'm a fan myself. And when I listen to it, it's exactly what I remember going to see when I went to shows. When I went to see, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, when I went to see, bands like X, or, any numerous other bands that I saw during that time growing up in Los Angeles, it's exactly what I would expect. And was a lot of fun. It was a lot of excitement. And so, if you get a chance, go over to Spotify. You can hear those albums there. You can buy them on iTunes. And anyway, I want to thank you for listening, sharing, subscribing to this podcast. I know it's been a while since I've put out an episode, so thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for listening to the music, because that's what this is, right? The College of Rock and Roll Knowledge. And I do love rock and roll. And so I'll be back soon. Until next time, have a safe and happy Halloween. Or maybe I want to take back safe. How about a little danger? How about have a dangerous Halloween? Be like Iggy, right? Give me danger. All right, that's it. Thank you. Rock on.
I'll be what you want me to be. The darkness will turn to light. I'm your dirty secret tonight. Dream or not and take a look inside. The Peepshow reveals what
Eddie Starr's The College of Rock and Roll Knowledge is a production of Ton Up Incorporated. Copyright 2021